Good morning. I am Dr. Michael Smith. I am joined this morning with my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Johnston. We are both board-certified psychiatrists with a lot of years of experience behind us, and we've enjoyed talking together about a variety of different issues. Of course, this is not intended to take the place of your regular appointment with your physician or a healthcare provider, but we do like to offer some ideas and hope you will find it interesting and hopefully intriguing. And if you do so, please follow us, give us a thumbs up or whatever, and we would appreciate that. Dr. Johnston, I know you have a good topic today, a topic that I've thought about a lot over the years. So let's hear about what you want to talk about today.
Well, psychiatrists, we've certainly run into the subject or the patient that has had difficulties with emotional burnout. And this is kind of a state where people become depleted emotionally, mentally. Their physical reserves also can be taxed, and a once enthusiastic person can feel really detached and ineffective and overwhelmed. And this should be distinguished from the usual fatigue that we might feel after a hard day or taking on a task for a few days that's difficult and leaves us exhausted. This is more of a state of depletion that lasts over time, and that even taking a break, taking a vacation, taking a weekend off won't necessarily restore the energy or the optimism again. So this is a condition that, again, I mentioned as somebody that might be a psychiatric patient. We've seen this. This is a condition that certainly isn't limited to a presentation in a psychologist or psychiatrist's office. This is a condition that I think a lot of us are at risk of developing as we take on what really is a pretty challenging, stressful lifestyle that many of us have.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. Certainly, this does not affect physicians. Don't we rise above this?
Yeah, it's a major risk for physicians, and I think that the professional burnout in a variety of venues is an important topic, especially because when a person has that burnout, it not only affects them, but it can affect the people that they are responsible for and are trying to help. So yeah, I
Yeah.
know you say that with the
Little tongue in cheek.
little tongue in cheek, but yeah, this is something that really can affect all of us, and I think to some extent maybe has affected the majority of us for some periods of our life. But it can be a dangerous situation and associated with some real health compromise.
What, you've talked about some of the symptoms already of just being worn out, but what are some of the other manifestations of being burned out? We talk a lot about burned out, and I think it's appropriate that we talk about that. But what are some of the other symptoms that ourselves or that we might observe in others?
Sure. Well, it is associated with anxiety, depression, sleep disturbance. It kind of overlaps with some of the other conditions, can affect our relationships, creativity, our sense of purpose. But the things that I think to really recognize burnout, that those would be emotional exhaustion, really not recovering after a stress, not getting back to a good baseline. Cynicism or detachment, where you become pessimistic, you don't look with an optimistic eye toward the future or that things will work out. I think that's a warning sign right there. Reduced effectiveness, a person that maybe takes on a lot of tasks but is unable to seem to keep up and really complete the same kind of workload as that they had been used to previously. And again, a loss of enthusiasm, difficulty concentrating too. Those are all, it can be signs of burnout and things that we should be aware of.
Mark, I reflect back on my days, which were similar to your days years ago in training Uh, we both put in some pretty long days, and there were times where at the end of going a night or two without any sleep and being up in the middle of the night dealing with difficult things, I would be exhausted and not able to go very much further. But I don't believe I was burned out at the time because I could get some rest and I would bounce back and be ready to continue the fight later on. So you're making a distinction here that rest, at least the usual amount of rest, is not sufficient. Do you
Not
have some
sufficient.
ideas? So I have two questions. One is, what are some of the things that we can do to maybe inoculate ourselves from this problem? And what are some of the characteristics in a person that might make them more vulnerable to having this
Those
issue?
are good. Let me let me take those two questions in reverse order, if I could.
Okay,
Talk
sure.
about uh, what tends to contribute to the burnout, and then that sets us up maybe to know what we might do about it. So, chronic stress is one thing, putting yourself in a circumstance, and sometimes these circumstances are more controllable than we allow ourselves to believe. But chronic stress certainly is a factor. A sense of lack of control or actual lack of control. Uh, it's interesting that not being under stress and not feeling like you can't get away from it is a major factor. They did an interesting study, and I've always be skeptical of studies that are animal studies that are meant to show the human person or human psychology and so forth. But I think this was an interesting one. Someone did a study where they had a little electrical grid. It wasn't harmful, but it was uncomfortable. And I think they had rats as the subject matter. What happened is the shock would come, and the rats, in a behavioral conditioning way, would learn if they pressed a lever, they could avoid most of the shocks, not all of the shocks. But what was interesting is they had one set of rats that had the lever that could decrease or seemingly control some of the shocks. They had another group of rats in a cage that had an electrified grid, and they would get random shocks that they couldn't do anything about. What was interesting is they controlled it, so the total number of shocks was the same for the group that was able to feel like they were adjusting the shocks or preventing some with their behavior, the
Right.
one as the other one. And what was interesting is the group that had no sense of control, their hair started to fall out. They started to look, they didn't eat they, properly and so forth. They became sickly. Whereas the ones that got the same number of shocks but were able to control their fate to some extent had a different reaction. And I think that that's something to realize. It's not just the amount of stress we have, but our sense of being able to control it and perhaps trying to look for ways that we can control it. Perfectionism is another thing that expecting that things will work out just a certain way. And it suggests to maybe an inappropriate level of being able to control events. We have to realize in this complicated world with other people who have their own direction and have their own thoughts and ideas, we're not going to be able to control as much as maybe we would think we would like to. So people with perfectionistic qualities are more subject to burnout. Um, and being compassionate, which is a wonderful quality of the human person. You've talked a lot about the value and importance of giving, but
Right.
compassion and committing oneself overly to the service of others at times can result in burnout. And so it's a difficult balance sometimes for us to choose between uh, needed rest and doing something that we need to do for ourselves versus perhaps helping others. Having poor boundaries, not being able to say no, And this is a situation at work and so forth too that can be hard for people. They're obviously, for various reasons, don't want to say no to the boss or whatever. Sleep deprivation also is another factor. So, chronic stress, lack of control, perfectionism, compassion fatigue, where you're trying to give maybe to beyond the limits that you're able to do it in a healthy way, poor boundaries and sleep deprivation. Those are factors that result in burnout.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to have that insight into that. Um, and those characteristics might suggest some of the things we can do to alleviate our vulnerability to this. Do you have some specific ideas or recommendations to keep up our emotional resiliency so we don't fall into this burnout trap?
Sure, absolutely. I think some of the uh, some of the things I've just said would suggest um, a kind of a reappraisal and a rethinking of our commitments and our ability to handle chronic stress in situations where we have little control. I think some things that really help are exercise and mindfulness. And these may seem to be not directly connected to the factors as much, but it's amazing that exercise resets a bit the ability to tolerate emotional challenges, including the ones that produce burnout. Mindfulness allows a person to get away from the sense of being trapped, the sense of being unable to relax or to find peace. So those mindfulness techniques we've talked about some on our other
Yeah,
podcast, those are important too. Reconnecting with relationships is important. And I think sometimes we get so busy with tasks and to-do lists, we really forget the people in our lives. And I'm not talking about trying to be responsible for them or do things for them. Just talking about a quality relationship where we're visiting, we're catching up, we're taking advantage of the benefit of other people around us. And then I think a person should seek help when needed. There are some cognitive behavioral ways that you can directly assess or go after some of the issues that lead to burnout, the perfectionism, trying to control things, having a more rational or reasonable perspective of what you can control and what you can't control. And I think professional help, not necessarily long term or fancy getting into all of your psychological history, but some practical techniques sometimes just to help. And again, that's part overall, I think, of a reappraisal. What's important and what isn't, and trying to be good to yourself, resting, sleeping, protecting your sleep hours as you're able to get good quality sleep. All of these things I think can help.
yeah. Well, those are some good thoughts. One of my observations, Mark, is years ago when you and I were both pretty young, I think professions like medicine or being a firefighter or a police officer, law enforcement officer, um, my recollection is that those people, all of them, are in some pretty difficult circumstances at times. But at the time, back in the old days, when we were young, there was really no expectation that they would seek out the kind of support and care that you're talking about. One of the changes I've seen over the course of the last few decades is that fire departments, police departments, even healthcare operations like we've been involved with are making it more acceptable to seek out some support, professional help or otherwise, to address this problem of burnout. So I know firefighters will regularly get kind of debriefed on some of the things that they do. I don't know if that's as much as it should be, but it's better than it used to be. I know firefighters in the past used to carry a big burden all of the time. And I have a good friend that's had a great career as a firefighter, but it did take a toll on him. And in today's world, I think that has been addressed at least to some degree. So go ahead, please.
Especially the paramedic side of being a firefighter in that line of work, because I've treated some paramedics over the years. And again, there's the risk not only of burnout, but also PTSD from the difficult circumstances that they deal with commonly
Yeah,
in their work. You
yeah,
bring up, you remind me of something also important to mention that I haven't yet, and that's prevention is something that we need to think about when it comes to burnout. In other words, it's best to not have a full blown kind of state of feeling debilitated before we do something. And I think reevaluating our stressful circumstances, looking at the circumstances that we feel that we can't control, but reappraising or taking a reappraisal of that, I think that's important. So doing all the things that we can, trying to not become overly sleep deprived, trying to be good to ourselves, building some rest time, even really short periods of rest in our work day or in our lives. Again, being with people, it's amazing how friendly chit chat and talking to a friend that understands you and enjoys you and where there's some humor and so forth. Those things really can go a long way to resetting our stress and helping avoid the burnout. But I think a person should try to recognize early these factors and try to intervene before they become more serious. So in any event, I've got some nuggets to finish up with
sure.
if you would be so
Uh,
inclined.
Let me just underscore one thing you said, and then I want to hear your nuggets. We
Sure.
did spend some time a while back talking about the role of humor, and you just alluded to humor as being something that might be protective for this, and I just wanted to underscore that. So let me hear your nuggets, Mark.
Okay. Yeah. Remember, burnout is more than fatigue. You can experience fatigue in a lot of ways, and in some ways, you can anticipate being fatigued with some challenges. That doesn't necessarily equate to burnout, but burnout is that fatigue that doesn't resolve and that state of mind that doesn't look forward with optimism. The next nugget is recognize it early. There are factors, there's some of these symptoms that I talked about where you start having problems getting back with a short rest. It doesn't restore you. That's a warning sign to recognize early. Not having optimism, feeling that there's nothing that really can be done to make things better. These kind of pessimistic states of mind, recognize that they can be a sign of impending burnout. Realize that recovery takes some intentional restoration. In other words, you just can't work your way through it. That's one of the problems that people have. They've been working hard. They think, I'll just work a little harder and then things will be better. And they can play into even developing more burnout. But trying to intentionally do the things that can help recovery, and mention some of them: socialization, good sleep, good appetite and exercise. Be intentional about building those things in and starting those if you haven't been involved in those behaviors. Healthy boundaries, another nugget. Healthy boundaries protect your long-term performance. So whether that's a boundary with your boss, which can be a challenge, or boundaries in the family, knowing, being able to say no, being able to negotiate, and be able to take care of yourself as you take care of your job and other people is an important art, I think, to living that needs to be cultivated. And then finally, uh, renewal is essential to meaningful work. You might think, well, I don't have time for this psychological stuff, for these, to take a rest or something like that. But I can tell you, the quality of your work, the quality of your life will be less if you don't address these things and deal with them. And so even if your goal was to be a better office worker, one of the best ways to do that is to obviously take care of yourself. There's a quote that I think we've used before on a podcast, but I like it so much I've wrote it down again here. Almost anything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. In this instance, to qualify it a little bit, when burnout is occurring and so forth, unplugging a few minutes may not restore you. So could be a warning sign. But the general principle of being able to get away from stress and build in rest and recovery, that's critical in our lives and something we need to always be aware of.
All right, Mark. Well, thank you for a good discussion on an important topic. And I look forward to continuing our ongoing conversations on various topics of importance to you and me and to people around us that we care about. So anyway, thanks again. And we'll sign off for now.